Hello, it's Anthony Chadwick, welcoming you to another episode of VETchat, the UK's #1 veterinary podcast. And I'm so pleased to have an old friend and colleague, Owen Atkinson, on the line today. Owen is the owner of the Dairy Vet Consultancy, working on the Cheshire-Shropshire borders, very much looking at how can we do dairy farming and dairy vetting in a more strategic way. So, Owen, first of all, thanks very much for coming on. We are of a similar vintage. As I was saying, I got kicked out of dairy vetting quite early on in my career. You've managed to stay the course. And, of course, the business itself is 10 years old, which is always a testimony of success. If you can have a business, like ourselves as well, that's lasted over 10 years, we must be doing something right, mustn't we?
Well, you're starting. Morning, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be here. But you're starting off with all the platitudes to butter me up. But I'm not your vintage.
Well,
I'm a little bit. I think I'm a little bit younger.
You're a 90s vet. Come on.
I am. I qualified in 1994. Yes, a 90s
I was
vet.
1990, so I'm not that far ahead of you. But no, it's great to have you on. And I think we wanted to talk today about just the changing role of vets. I mean, I'm very much 4 years earlier than you, a disciple, at least partly, of James Herriot. I mean, I wanted to be a vet from when I was 8. I remember the old story of I was in the junior school playground and one of my friends stood on a baby sparrow by mistake. And I said, oh, if I'd have been a vet, I could have saved that sparrow's life. And then, of course, as I got a bit older, I started reading the James Herriot books, Gerald Durrell books, a lover of animals. And that was me sort of set on my way. Didn't get into vet school first time, but managed to get in finally. And then obviously moved through. It was interesting. I was at a SPIVS conference, which was the year before you qualified. And I remember one of the vets said, who wants to be in mixed practice? And we all put our hands up. And he said, well, within 5 years, the majority of you will be small animal vets. And of course, that kind of is what happened, I think. Very much in the 90s, probably earlier than that, small animal predominated. But if we go back to the beginning of last century, of course, most vets were horse vets, weren't they?
Yes. So to answer your original question, I think I was a more accidental vet than perhaps you described your path. I was really interested in biology. That was my thing, and I think I was more on a route to become a doctor. But I'm from a farming background, and I'd been around cows and other livestock all the way through my childhood, and it was only last minute when I decided to apply for veterinary rather than for medicine.
Yeah.
But yes, I was a fan of the James Herriot books as well. And of course, that was Saturday night TV. James Herriot was a big thing, I think, for a lot of our generation. And it is interesting looking back at the history of where the farm vet evolved from, because I only found this out since becoming a vet myself, but I think it was my great grandfather was a horse vet. And he had a son, which was my great grandfather, that he threw out of the house, and he went into service where he met my great grandma. They were both working in a big country house, where they call it in those days going into service, I think.
Yes.
And he threw him out because his interest was in cars, in the early days of cars, and he became a chauffeur. And he met my great grandma, who was a housemaid in this big country house. And he threw him out because he was a horse vet, and he saw the car, the motor car, the automobile, as the enemy of his profession. So he threw him out of the house. And in those days, as I understand it, of my great grandfather, that's what vets were. It was before the companion animal veterinary sector was even embryonic, I guess, in those days, and even before farm vets. So farm vets came about after the 1940s, and had a big rise in the 1950s in the post-war years, which is the James Herriot era.
Yeah.
And we're a short-lived bunch, really, because obviously farm vets are on the decline now. You were joking earlier, there's not many of us left, and that's true. We're on the decline, having had our huge growth in the 1950s and 60s, probably peaked in the 70s.
Yeah.
and then it's become, the profession has moved into the more companion animal sector.
It's become more niche. I think that whole idea of even a mixed practitioner vet is becoming less and less common, isn't it? Because obviously various categories of mixed practice. Some people doing small and a bit of equine, or small and a bit of large animal.
Yeah.
But that's becoming more difficult to do because those small farms don't exist anymore, do they? Or not as much.
Not so much. I mean, I do a lot of work with vets all around the country, so I do still see lots of mixed vets actually. And it's interesting, I'd love to know the answer to this question is what proportion of dairy farm work, for example, which is that's my sector, what proportion is done by what I would call dedicated dairy vets, and
Yes.
what proportion is done by mixed vets. And I suspect it's still probably around 50-50,
Hmm.
as in a high proportion is still done by vets who would also do companion animal species, because there's a lot of the UK. I mean, I live in Cheshire,
Yeah.
dairy heartland, so you very much got your dairy practice, your small animal practice, and your equine practices. It's a very diversified profession, but there's lots of the country, and if you look in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, it's a lot of the country which are kind of more rural, and
Hmm.
therefore maybe don't justify having dedicated small animal practices, and there is still that mixed vet practitioner role.
Hmm. It is interesting going back to your great great granddad, who was a equine vet. Of course, he did get it right, because I do talk occasionally about the great horse manure crisis of the 1890s, which I'm sure you're
Yes.
aware of, which was a letter in the Times in the 1890s which said, a bright spark had worked out that within the next 10 to 20 years, London would be 10 foot deep in horse manure. And they actually did a conference in America to try and solve this problem. And actually, they all walked out. They couldn't work it out. They were all despairing. It's almost like a sort of climate crisis story, but from 100 years ago. And in the end, of course, the clever people at places like
The
Rolls,
car came to our rescue.
yeah, and the car rescued us. And now, of course, the car is
is
part
is the big, yes, is the enemy. Yeah.
part of the problem. But of course, we're now creating electric cars and so on. So,
Yeah.
in a sense, that 40s and 50s vet, as we were saying from the James Herriot books, he was almost seen as a, a sort of lauded figure within the community, and treated with great deference when he came into the farm. And then that maybe did change in that sort of
Well,
70s,
and it
80s.
was, you're right, it was a he in those days.
Yes.
It would be probably almost 100% a he, if not
Yeah.
100% he, in those 1950s. Um, yes, so I talk sometimes about how the farm vet role has evolved from, perhaps, if
Mm.
we call James Herriot era the farm vet 1.0,
Yeah.
and sometimes described as a me relationship. So
Yeah.
a lot of things have evolved, but part of the evolution has been that farmer vet dynamic, which I'm very interested in, that relationship piece. And the farmer would have been in deference to the vet, Mr. Herriot, sir, here's a bucket of hot water for
Yeah.
you, sir. And then when I came along, certainly by the 1990s, it was, I would call, a vet 2.0 phase, and I'm interested in the vet 3.0, which is where we are now and where we're headed. But vet 2.0, which if I could describe that, because I think that typifies very much the profession that I
Mm.
graduated into, would be that the farm vet is a service provider, a tradesperson, someone who the farmer rings up because they're in difficulty and they want this, that, and the other. They want a farm vet to come out and fix their cow with an LDA. Oh, don't come before 3 o'clock because we'll be milking. Oh, don't come after 5 o'clock because you'll be charging us out of hours. Oh, you will be okay if you manage by yourself. So don't send us an inexperienced new graduate. Oh, and when you come, could you bring a bottle of Marbasil and a box of this antibiotic tubes and a tub of that antibiotic tubes? That's epitomised
Yeah.
the vet 2.0, where the vet is certainly not lauded. And if anything, the power dynamic is with the farmer, because the farmer is calling the shots. Not necessarily interested even in the vet's opinion. I mean, I'm being a little bit catastrophizing the relationship, perhaps, but that would be classed as the UU relationship.
Mm.
The Vet 3.0, which is the more collaborative relationship, and the one that I'm always striving to achieve, is that there is no power dynamic in the same sense. You are working as equals, vet and farmer, as professionals both, and you're working as collaborators, both recognizing the strengths that each person brings, the professionalism almost that each person brings to the whole piece, which is to improve farming of animals. And that
Yeah,
needs strategy, and it's a totally different approach, because it's not the vet not being in the role of fixing things that are already broken, but the vet being there to provide a strategic input in maintaining and improving the welfare and the health of the animals. And now, Anthony, I know this interests you, and now improving the health and sustainability of the whole farm. And that's a growing role of the vet. The farm vet is being involved in farm sustainability
I
from an
think that,
environmental point of view as well as an economic
yeah.
point of view.
Well, I think that's really important. The collaborative side. If we work together as a team, we're going to accomplish more than if we're almost adversarial, which I think can happen. And of
It's more
course,
healthy.
yeah. And well, you actually, I for a short time was on working as a farm vet, and you could go onto some farms where you could see that it was a friendly relationship, and some, as you were saying, where it was very much, you are my servant. Come at 3 o'clock. There won't be anybody around. You'll just have to get on and do yourself, which obviously is not helpful for anyone, and it's not a pleasant
No.
environment to work in, is it?
No, and it's fair to point out, I was catastrophizing the relationship before.
Yeah, no,
It's fair to point out that a lot of that Vet 2.0, I'd still call it Vet 2.0, where the vet is the service provider, is on a friendly basis as well.
yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, the majority of farmers are really lovely people. They're working on the land, and they're definitely adding to society. Um, I think the point you were making about the strategic is really important, because as we start to think and having some time to think strategically and not rushing from one call to the next, it's a milk fever, then it's mastitis and so on. Even that sort of strategic look now, looking at things like antimicrobial resistance, we've
Yeah.
massively reduced the amount of antibiotics we're using on farms. Even dry cow therapy has changed over the last 10
Yes, it has.
years. And that is because, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you've been able to have more time to pore over numbers and look at different ways of solving problems, rather than, well, there's a bottle of Marbacil or a bottle of streptomycin, this should sort your problem out.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I guess I'm unusual in how what I chose to do, Anthony, in my career. So I was a vet in practice for the first 25 years, and 20 years, it must have been 20 years, because I'm not that old. And it was 10 years ago. It was 10 years ago, almost to the day, when I left practice to set up my consultancy business, Dairy Veterinary Consultancy. And one of the reasons I did that was because I felt at the time I wanted to do more of this strategic preventative work, and yet what was holding me back was some of the baggage that I think you have as a farm vet in practice, in that how people perceive you, including farmers.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was interesting. It was very telling that when I left my practice, and farmers obviously got to know that I was working out my notice period, they asked me what I was going to do, and I said, well, I'm going to start my own consultancy business, and what did that mean, etc. And I tried to explain. And it was, oh, that's a shame. Oh, you won't be a vet anymore. Oh, we'll be sorry to lose you as a vet. And they didn't see me that I would. They thought that I wasn't going to be a vet anymore. And that was really telling. And that's kind of why I did it, because I felt that I was being held back by the perception that everyone has, farmers included, of what a farm vet could bring to them. And that is someone who can mend broken animals, fix problems once they were in that problem situation. And a lot of vets talked when I was at university, we talked about prevention rather than cure, and a lot of farm vets really want to do that type of work, prevention rather than cure. And yet the day-to-day demand from farmers, unfortunately, still today in 2023 is still cure. It's
Mm.
still the phone going for sick animals, carvings, etc., and fertility work, which I would say is akin to doing cure, because you're not planning for better fertility. You're dealing with the cows
Who aren't? Yeah.
who aren't in calf and need to get in calf,
Yeah.
and I don't see that as strategic. I don't
Mm.
see that strategic. So yeah, I've perhaps not answered your question very clearly, because you were originally saying we've got more time now to do that strategic stuff. I think for farm vets that are still in practice, traditional practice,
Yeah.
I think time is very much the enemy. They
Yes.
don't have the time to do the stuff they would like to do.
And perhaps it's not, up until recently, it's not been for a farmer to pay money to get somebody in to talk about their farm.
And I think that's the other side of it. You've
Yeah,
hit the
has
nail on
been
the
an
head. Is
expense.
you do what as a vet, you're in business. You have to be in business to be. It's got to be
Yes.
profitable, otherwise it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And you do what people pay you to do. And the demand is from farmers to,
Mm.
they'll happily pay you for I guess the more what I would call the traditional role, which is
Difficult
fertility
carving,
work, yeah,
etc. Yeah.
and fertility work,
Yeah.
etc. Um, and they're less likely to pay you for that overarching
Mm.
strategic role. It's a hard nut to crack. That is, it's
Mm.
something which is changing, and it's changed in the 10 years that I've been in my business. So a growing part of my business now is actually working directly with farms, but they tend to be large farms, they tend to be large businesses, and they're quite happy to pay my daily rate, which is, it's a professional daily rate. It's circa £1,000 a day, and they will pay that for me to do training with their farm team, or to look at, for example, last week I was at a farm looking at their foot health, and they just wanted a day concentrating on that one issue, and they were
Yeah.
happy to invest in that. And that's really refreshing to see that. I would love to see more of it.
But I think you've been an early advocate of it. And obviously, with all of these sort of curves that we have, you have the early adopter, then you have more people looking at that. It makes sense, as you said, from university, um, prevention is cheaper than cure. And so it's something we've talked about, but perhaps we're not doing as much in the dairy industry as we would like, but we're probably doing more than we were 10
We're
years ago.
doing more.
Like you said.
I'm impatient.
Yeah.
we,
Well, you want
we
to move
sort of,
quicker, don't you?
well, I have a little saying. I've got it on the wall in front of me. Actually, I've made a little poster of it, and it's "Be the change you would like to see,"
Yeah, exactly.
and I've tried to live by that.
And going back, the government has brought in, and I'm not sure how well they're working. The ELMS, the environmental land management stuff, which allows a vet to come in and I think spend a certain amount of time, and the
Mm,
the vet is paid by the government.
yeah.
So at least that's moving in the right direction. I felt quite hopeful about it, and then I've
Yeah.
heard sort of rumblings that it's maybe not.
I mean, I always have mixed feelings about these things, because other funded schemes to try and pump prime vets doing this kind of role have occurred before. I'm not
Yeah,
particularly familiar with the elms. I'm not in practice now, so I'm not. It's not a pot of money, if you like, that I'm interested in drawing upon. Um, the flip side is, and this is perhaps what you're going to say, Anthony, yourself, is that unless the farmer's paying for it themselves, there is a risk they don't value it.
yes,
And that might sound trite, but I think it's true.
yeah,
And also, is it enough to to stimulate the vet profession as well, ourselves, to change our service offering? Because both sides of the equation have got to be there. There's got to be the demand from the farmer, but we can do a lot as vets to create that demand by setting our stall out in a different way. And I think just a visit, a
mm,
£300 pot of money to pay the vet to go and do one visit. I'm not sure if it's enough to do it,
yeah,
but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it will be a little bit of pump priming, and like I said, I'm impatient. It might all help by incremental steps to get to
mm,
where I see the future being. Um, I I haven't chosen to sort of take that funding
yeah.
myself, and I'm not sure if it's enough by itself in any means.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because, as you say, this sort of change does take time. You're 10 years into your business now. I remember coming and having a drink with you to discuss it 10 years ago. And as I say, we're both still here, so we're doing something right. But inevitably, even perhaps what your business plan was 10 years ago will have changed because of circumstances. We've obviously had COVID, we've had lockdowns, etc. All of these things and Brexit obviously wasn't a thing 10 years ago. So all of these things have probably changed some of what your business plan was talking about 10 years ago.
Yes. So I had a look at my business plan recently because it is 10 years, and I came across it on an old computer file. I came across this thing that I'd written in 2008, actually.
Yes.
So I left my practice in 2013, but back in 2008, I was starting to sketch out
Yes.
a kind of future, a different future for myself, one that would be my dream, which was prevention rather than cure. And I kind of sketched out this business. I think I called it VetSense. That was my maybe I should have stuck with that. It's a dairy veterinary consultancy.
Yeah. Well, it does what it says on the tin, doesn't it?
Dairy veterinary. Yes, I've had the Mickey taken out of me because it's a bit of a mouthful, but it cuts down on spam emails. Owen Atkinson at dairyveterinary.co.uk. But no, it was surprising, actually, how close to that original plan that I wrote in 2008, 2009 I still am, because I kind of envisaged a different customer base for a start than just farmers. And that's been true. My customers are other vets, they are farmers, but they're also professionals within the dairy industry, which includes milk buyers, feed manufacturers, semen companies, etc. The range of work I do is pretty much as I outlined I would be doing, which is some training, some strategic planning, which sounds very vague, but it's quite a big part of what I do, actually, in terms of working with businesses to sort of look ahead and think, okay, well, which way is this going, and how can we change our offering to meet that future, that future prediction. Yes, I guess it was pleasing to think that I've managed to achieve some of those things that were in my dream.
No, that's brilliant, and I think it's also a testimony to, we've got the Facebook group Vet Stay Go Diversify, and people sometimes feel trapped in a job and they don't know how to move on. And I think we both have done similar. You started that in 2008, but it was 5 years before you made the jump.
Yes.
I kind of fell upon webinars as an idea, and within 18 months had sold my practice, so I could concentrate more on it. I still did my dermatology. And I think it's a really important thing, isn't it, that sometimes people feel a bit depressed about work, don't want to be a vet anymore, and they take in desolation a precipitative step, whereas actually if you can strategize and plan out, that there is so much that we can do with the degree. We don't have to be physically touching animals every day.
You've made a very good point, really. Yeah. And actually you make your best decisions when you come from a position of strength and happiness, don't you? Exactly. You're right. It's not a good decision to just escape from an unhappy situation. I guess some people feel more trapped than others. I'm the type of person that, when you make a change, you're less likely to fear a change ever again. And I'm the type of person that's quite happy to make quite radical changes.
Yeah.
I've moved. Before I did what I did, I'd had several jobs within very good practices, but every change I'd made seemed to be better than what I was doing before. And that was a positive reinforcement I had. So I was never afraid. Mind you, that's not quite true. I was going to say I was never afraid of making that leap. I was hellishly afraid at the time because I was a partner and I was very secure, and it was an excellent practice, and anyone in their right mind would have stuck with what I already had. And a lot of people said to me, "Owen, you're crazy."
Yes.
So I was afraid, but I guess I had some confidence that change can be a good thing. You don't always know how it's going to end up, but it can be a good thing just to make a change.
Do you want to become a part of the largest online veterinary community in the world? The Webinar Vets membership is the perfect tool to easily complete your veterinary CPD or CE. Watch webinars anytime, any place, on any connected device. Become a member today and explore our library of over 2,000 premium quality webinars. We also care about the environment as well as your CPD or CE. That's why we plant trees for every one of our members. To find out more, visit thewebinarvet.com/memberships or click on the membership tab on our website.
Change is happening more and more quickly, isn't it? The world is quickening up. And if you are not comfortable with change, I think it makes life more and more difficult. So it's good to see that the family genes from your great-great-grandfather who threw his son out because he wanted to work in motor cars have not translated through to you, or at least it's been diluted over the generations.
Diluted out, yes.
There's been some hybrid vigor coming from other lines and things, which is all
yes. Good. And change. I mean, this is another subject which is just so fascinating, and it's an area I'm very involved with, is helping. So one of the things I do, Anthony, sorry to explain, I do CPD for farm vets, and one of the things I do is run a 4-day course called Herd Health Leadership.
Yes.
And it is helping farm vets be agents of change with their farm clients, herd health leadership.
Yeah.
And I think it's hugely important. It's a skill that can be learned, and I have spent a lot of my years making mistakes along the way, and I want to kind of be able to pass on some of the things that I've learned to help younger vets, maybe people who are sort of 10 years qualified now, who are just looking to farm vets who are looking to take their career to the next level, to just fast forward them into that, having more confidence to be a leader of change with farm businesses.
I think it's really important, and you know, somebody once said the intelligent person learns from their mistakes, but the genius learns from other people's mistakes. So if we can have people like yourself as a coach who are passing on your received wisdom from 30 years as a vet, then that's got to be helpful, hasn't it?
Well, I hope so.
29 years. I don't want to age you.
Thank you.
You haven't quite hit that 30-year yet. You're not a decrepit vet.
Thank you. I've still got some black hairs here. They're not quite grey yet.
Well, I've been going grey for quite a long time. So with the change, obviously, the need, I think there's a movement to change the industry even more. There's sort of challenges with things like, you know, one of my pet subjects is very much how do we make the industry more sustainable in every sense of the word, but particularly environmentally.
Yes, and you're talking the dairy farming industry, I'm guessing.
Exactly. And dairy farming, I think, potentially, you know, having spoken to cattle vets, has a bad press, and perhaps there are some of the things that we do need to change because we need to get them right. But actually, there's other areas where perhaps the story that's being told is a bit misleading. I particularly look at things like, even from, you know, a young vet 30 years ago, I always felt, why are we pushing our cows so hard that after 5 years we have to cull them? You know, would it not be better to push them less hard for them to last 7, 8, 9 years, produce milk, have them on grass rather than on concentrates? That seemed to me to be a more sustainable way. But of course, if we look at that, sometimes from a carbon footprint perspective, people will say that's more heavy on the carbon than actually having a very intensive herd, which to me doesn't seem like it feels the right answer. I know that is not scientific at all, but sometimes going with your gut feeling is also appropriate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've touched on some really important points there, and one of them is that as a farm vet, I've not always felt proud to be part of the industry. I still don't always feel proud to be part of the dairy industry. Now, it's one of the reasons I did what I did. You know, I want to change things. Again, be the change you would like to see. There are some things that I wouldn't attempt to defend within the dairy industry. And yet they are as they are. It is as it is. And one of the things that I don't like to defend, I wouldn't just defend, is the high cow turnover rate, which I think you alluded to there, the culling rate. And in America, of course, you know, if you listen to an advisor who sort of comes from that American school of thought, high input, high output, is we don't cull hard enough. Oh, your best cows are always the young generation, you know, to cull harder, cull harder. And one of my farmers I work with said to me recently, who you know, his average age at culling is only 5 years old, said, "Oh, my consultant said I'm not culling hard enough. I need to cull harder." And I said, "Well, where's the sustainability in the economics in that?" There isn't. It is a complicated situation, as you then alluded to and described, in that we have in Britain a very, very diverse dairy industry. We have everything from, on the one hand, the high input, high output, all year round calving, let's call it the American system, Holstein herds, housed all year round, doing 12,500 litres per cow per year. And then on the other hand, to the other extreme, we have the type of herd type which is epitomised by the New Zealand system. Spring block calving, the cows are doing 4,500 to 5,500 litres milk per year. And they are, some of them never house. Some of these farms, the cows are out wintered in the winter months during the dry period when the cows are dry, not dry weather, dry cow. And they're a grazing system, so they're extensive. And as you said, gut feeling, and mine too, is that is the more sustainable system. And truth be known, I'm going to put my cards on the table here, which might make me unpopular with some people. That is my preferred system. If I was a dairy farmer and I had a choice of system, I would farm in that way. I think you get a better quality of life. I think there's less stress. I think it's more profitable. And it's more sustainable. However, it is more complex than that. And of course, we have, what I missed out there is that the majority of farms in Britain are somewhere in between those two extremes. So we've got a big pool of farms that are there. What I missed out there is that not every farm, because of the environment as in the geographical environment they live in, and where their land blocks are located, can farm in that extensive way, because you need to have access. The cows need to have access to all the fields, and so a lot of farms that have plots of land here, there, and everywhere, and the cows can't have access to all the fields. So, you know, there's those sort of localized geographic constraints. And then looking more holistically, there's a confusion, let's say, about what is the most sustainable approach, because there are some people, some advisors, experts who would say, well, the carbon footprint of your intensive farms that are doing 12,500 litres per cow is much lower than the carbon footprint of those extensive herds that are doing 5,000 litres per cow, because you have less cow overhead. In other words, if each cow is considered one methane producing unit, you're going to get a hell of a lot more milk out of less methane producing units from your high yielding system. I think those calculations are flawed because they don't take into account then the next part of the big picture, which is, well, what are the inputs, and how about the carbon capture of the pasture land that are associated with the grazing farms, as opposed to the intensive farms that might have, for example, very high cost inputs such as soya, which in their own right has an environmental impact. So it's incredibly complex, and I'm not expert enough to know the answer. I am happy to work with both types of farm. Both can be done very, very well. Both, unfortunately, can be done badly.
So welfare is, you know, you can have a very extensive system where the welfare of the cows is very poor, and an intensive system. I remember speaking to vets in the past who have managed these, and welfare potentially can be very high.
Well, I mean, you don't get 12,500 litres per cow in a poor welfare system. It's impossible to do it. You've got to be. I mean, it's a lot more complex. It involves a higher level of skill and expertise. You know, I guess the analogy might be these are thoroughbred horses, the equivalent of that you're managing, as opposed to, not to do down the grazing cows, but as opposed to pit ponies. Not to do down pit ponies either, but but they're a more robust animal. So yes, welfare-wise, again, it's a difficult one to call. I like to see cows outside grazing, as do a lot of farmers.
And I think a lot of people like that. It's pastoral, isn't it? It feels
It
like
is pastoral. Yes, and I think it's difficult to replicate the benefits of the outdoor environment inside. However, it is possible, and herds do it, and with care. So, for example, and this is a minor point, but having grooming brushes, for example, to overcome boredom, having plenty of space, having very good lying surfaces. The reason why cows are kept inside on those high input systems is because it's impossible for a cow on those kind of systems to meet its nutritional needs through grazed grass alone. So, of course, if you're providing feed, not necessarily in concentrate, but in form of what's called a total mixed ration, which is silage mixed in with straights, cereals, etc., then it makes sense to have them on an indoor system. In fact, you can only do it on an indoor system. Or if you're robotic, and robot farms have a lot of welfare benefits to the cow because they're voluntary milking systems. The cow can come and go when she wants to be milked, and a cow giving a lot of milk can get milked more often, more frequently, which is kinder to her udder. And yet those lend themselves more to an indoor system. So it is complex. I do like to see cows outside grazing, but that's not to say that cows indoors cannot have their needs met and be happy and live a fulfilling life as well.
Well, as always, I think one of my locums once said to me, if you've got two vets in the room and they both agree with each other, then one of them is not a vet. This is the conundrum, isn't it? That it's very difficult. And I think as you get older, you realise it, that it's not all black and white. There's a lot of grey in between, isn't there?
It is all grey, and we rely on other experts in this area. Like I say, it's working collaboratively again, isn't it? Because it really relies on experts, environmental experts, really, to help us through this minefield, which is what is the most sustainable and correct way to be farming our cows.
Owen, it's been fantastic speaking to you as always. A wide-ranging conversation, from one old vet to a much younger one, obviously.
Thank you for acknowledging that. Yeah, you get the brownie point now.
But really appreciate your time, and thank you for all that you're doing in the industry, because I think this strategic role that you've taken on in the last 10 years has been really beneficial for the whole cattle veterinary profession. So
thanks, Anthony. No, it's been a privilege to speak to you this morning. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Owen. And thanks everyone for listening. Hopefully see you on a podcast very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.